Welcome to the podcast. My name is David. Let's save the world. On this show, we're going to talk about schizophrenia. As many of you know, this show exists because of my personal battles with depression and generalized anxiety disorder. So I want to make sure that brain health is something that we talk about fairly often on the show. In fact, that brain health instead of mental health is going to come in handy just a little bit later. I've already recorded these interviews, so I know what's coming and I've learned something new today. Schizophrenia is something that is touched on fairly often in genre cinema, but how realistic is it? I'm not so sure. Superhero movies, horror, sci-fi, they tend to make things a little more fantastical than what the reality is. So in just a little bit, I'm going to be speaking with Linda Stalters, the founder of Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America. And as I mentioned, she's going to teach us a lot. But first, The Voices is a new movie about a young woman who seeks sanctuary at a remote family home where she struggles to cope with her sister's paranoid schizophrenia and her own sanity before it tears them apart. It stars Amanda Markowitz and Victoria Matlock and has a very cool appearance from Lynn Shay. Joining me now to discuss the film is the writer and co-director of the film, Bradley Fowler. Welcome to the show, man.
Hi, David.
I can't wait to dig into this great movie of yours. But first and foremost, I want to get into a little bit about the company because it really kind of intrigued me that this isn't a director that decided to start his own production company. This seems like a little family unit that is making several ventures together. So it's like somebody will say, hey, I have an idea. Great, I'll write the script. Okay, well, I'll star in it. Tell me a little bit about how Three Tales came along and what you guys do.
Three Tales production is pretty much exactly that. I met Amanda Markowitz. I was guest sort of teaching a class at the Margie Haber studio, and she was one of the students. And after the class, she came up and had a couple of questions about a specific method that I sort of work on. And we met for coffee and we hit it off. And she had all these ideas of creating her own content. And I said, sure. And so we just started. It started off just her and I, and then her husband. And shortly thereafter, I met Victoria Matlock, who's now my wife. So went from Three Tales to four. Yeah, but we just started to. It was basically myself, her, and her husband, and he's a businessman, and we were both are artists. And then when I met my wife, she got involved, but started off just doing shorts. We were making shorts, and we actually turned those shorts into a full-length feature film. So I don't know if you guys have seen the trailer or movie Love, Meet, Hope. But that's what it is. It's a story about an old man that wrote love stories every day of his life for his wife. And then when his wife dies, the grandson who's sort of given up on love learns to love again when he finds all those stories. So basically we took those vignettes and repurposed them to make it into a feature as opposed to losing that. So we basically just, when we have an idea that we want to work on, I'm usually the one that churns out the script, and we try to find positions where we're going to be able to act, but obviously we want to create content that is also marketable. So it's not. We try to make it as non-masturbatory as possible.
I hear you. Sometimes things are a little hard to approach.
Yeah.
But speaking of, uplifting films about love that lasts and inspiring people through the generations, your new movie, The Voices, if I were to explain The Voices in one way, I could say, oh, it's a very typical horror film because it has this thing and this thing and this thing, but it's really not. It's really a grounded take that kind of dispenses with a lot of the overly supernatural type of stuff. Where did this idea come from? What appealed to it? Because, like I said, there's certain times I was watching the film going, I know what's going to happen. Oh, that didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, so what about this grabbed you or whoever it was that came up with this in this stew of three tales?
Well, it happened in I think two ways. The first thing was that at the time that I wrote this, we were actually starting some initial fundraising and development of two features that we wanted to shoot in Winnemucca, Nevada, which we're still hoping to shoot, but they were both larger budget films, and we were hoping to package them together and shoot them back to back. But sort of jokingly, Amanda gave me a hard time, and she was like, why do you always got to write stuff that's so damn expensive? And uh, sometimes it's hard to do the fundraising, and so that I sort of took that as a personal challenge, and I just started like sort of surfing the web for ideas, and I stumbled across a YouTube video about this young lady who was raised by a mother with schizophrenia. And you got to forgive me if I misspeak on any of the terms. It's certainly not what I want to do, but it was about 4 years ago that I wrote the script. So a lot of my research
Sure.
and development, like my brain sort of, I forget things as time goes on. So if I misuse a
Sure.
term,
And
please
we're going to
forgive.
have an expert on later that's going to explain all of
Yeah.
that stuff. So,
Good. Well, so honestly, I saw that story and I was so incredibly moved by it, and I just thought thought it was haunting and filled with an incredible amount of love, and it surprised me that that was even something that was possible because it it sort of blew up my misconceptions of the disease, which led me down the rabbit hole. And then I started like studying it like crazy. I read a couple of books, I watched tons and tons of videos, and then I communicated with two people in the profession. I can't remember what college, somewhere in Southern California outside of Los Angeles. But a good friend of mine, Luke Meyer, who was uh, uh, um, teaching some psychology stuff at the time. And so I ran all the stuff by him and asked if it was possible that someone with the disease could, raise a kid. And they said, yeah. And then I asked, is that possible that it's a triggering event? Because I know what I know about the disease is that it's something that's sort of in your genetic code, and it's either unlocked or it's not. Again, from my limited knowledge, and I said, is this a possible triggering event? Something that sort of unlocks that key. And what he and you have to forgive me, I can't remember the other professor told me is that they didn't know of any concrete research that had been done that would either prove or disprove that theory, but it was something that was discussed in the community a bit. So I started to dig on my own, and I ended up finding tons and tons of cases where that was the case. And it primarily what would happen is I don't know how or why whatever that is inside the people that it unlocks, but it on the cases that I did find, it almost always happened directly after the child was born, which I thought was both terrifying and sad, and yet somewhat beautiful because uh, what it triggers my brain to tell a story, and my brain said, God, what a terrible disease, but what a beautiful thing that the human body sort of at least appeared to do to me, which is to sort of wait to completely let it go until after the child was born, as opposed to going through the stuff during it. But I did find cases of that as well. So, anyways, the point is, that's where it sort of came from, and I wanted to do the best job that I could as a writer, and as a production team to try to tell the story as honestly with the disease as we could.
well, first of all, when you're browsing the internet, the videos that you stumble upon are very different than the videos most people stumble upon. That's a completely different website.
Well, I'm digging.
So,
Yeah, I'm constantly digging for. I go down the rabbit hole. So if I see anything that could
oh, sure.
potentially trigger a story, like I'm currently working on well, not currently working on. I just finished. I got some development stuff right now to develop a few packages for films, but one of them is a Korean revenge story based on an incident that happened in Korea, like a really, really small incident that I just dug for and found. So yeah, I don't know. I think writers do that.
Yeah, I've always heard that uh, open the newspaper or pay attention to current events and then take an idea and spin it
You have
um,
to a little bit.
into wherever your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and you only have a certain amount of pages, and so like I wanted to delve in a little bit more into some of the religious aspects, um, not for the sake of sensationalizing, but because I did find a lot of research that shows that almost universally around the globe, people that experience this disease in the beginning, they that's usually what people jump to conclusion that, oh my God, something's haunting me, or something's, you know what I mean. So
Sure.
even though it is a mental health thing, people's perception is not necessarily mental health. That very I think it's human nature to jump to the external as opposed to internal. Because
Sure.
if you
Yeah.
did get
If you
the
were
disease,
hearing voices in your head, you might think it was God or a
yeah,
demon or, yeah.
because then you at least
Yeah.
have something to blame, and that to me would be much more peaceful. If all of a sudden I start hearing voices and I could say, all right, well, that's an external, then potentially I could get rid of that external. But the second I was faced with the reality of its internal, uh, um, that's much more scary to me.
Yeah. The reason why this show even exists is because I dealt with suicidal ideation for years and had a lot of depression issues and stuff like that. So I noticed that horror movies and science fiction films kind of helped me through that. So I thought, let's talk about it from let's talk about film. So
Hmm.
I I really do think that you captured that really, really well. It's scary on a, and I don't want to mislead people that it's a slasher film or what have you, but it's scary on a deeper level because is this something that's happening to me or is this something inside that is going wrong?
Hmm.
And to me, that was a terrifying aspect. So, can you get into a little bit about the things you did, or whether maybe it was the actresses involved, who are both great, by the way,
Hmm.
um, of how you kind of tapped in to make this as realistic as possible, so that you weren't, 'cause a lot of times when they say, oh, well, Sucker Punch was about schizophrenia. Well,
Hmm.
in this movie, you're not fighting Nazis and robots and dragons.
Yeah.
It's very grounded and very, like I said, personally terrifying. Can you get into a little bit of how you made that realistic?
Well, I'd say, we each sort of served our part. I feel like I served my part best on the page. And my co-director Wesley Alley did a good job of sort of helping to bring those images to life. But on the page and on the film, the idea was to recreate scenes over and over again with slight variations to not only make send the characters on that path of like not knowing what reality is, but I also wanted to sort of make the audiences get second guess and wonder where they were at in what was going on. Um, so that's what I feel like we did. But as far as the portrayal, I mean, that's almost entirely the actresses. The the slightly masturbatory thing in this was that when I wrote this, I did intentionally try to find the hardest acting roles I could find for Amanda Markowitz and Victoria Matlock, and the reason it is because Hollywood, when you're fortunate enough to get work, and it's wonderful when you do. So don't get me wrong, but when you do get work, they constantly want you to do everything but act. They want to put you in a box. The amount of times I've heard casting directors tell a room full of actors, "We just want to hire you. We want to hire what you are." So there's this thing that I feel like is being taken away from actors and neutering actors and telling them, okay, well, figure out what's your box and be that box and play that box. But unfortunately, you have people like Amanda Markowitz and Victoria Matlock that are phenomenally talented that can step outside of that box and play opposites of what they are or stretch. And unfortunately, you're just very rarely given those roles or those opportunities. So I'll jump in. I'm sorry, I'm a little long winded at times.
No, you're fine.
But both Amanda and Victoria took significantly different routes to achieving these characters. Amanda works a lot more like I do. She's a lot more method, sort of Meisner based, but a lot more methody. Whereas Victoria is one of the most technical actors I've ever seen, because she was having to do so many layers. Like for instance, she's having to play a scene, which she's living a scene, and in that scene she has an objective in the scene, but yet she also has the secret that she's keeping, and then in addition to that, the character, the life that she's living, doesn't know whether or not the scene that she's living is reality at the time. And in order to do that, Victoria not only addressed the purpose of the scene, the tone of the scene, the relationship with the other actor, the intention, but she also created all this subtext dialogue from, I think, three or four different sort of emotional points of view from the voices that are in her head. She wrote that all out. I never read it, but when she's looking around and she's hearing things, she actually has dialogue that she was going through and things that were interrupting her. So I think the two they did fantastic. But
Which the movie's getting really good reviews. There were a couple of comments that I saw where it was like, well, it seemed like a couple things happened a couple of times in the film. Like, why did you waste the time to do basically the same thing twice? Or that I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, that was definitely intentional.
There were scenes in the film where I went, have I seen it? Or did they repeat the? Oh, it's slightly different.
We were trying to get people lost into it. That was the intention.
Yeah, I mean, there were times that I thought I was losing my mind, because I was like, I don't think I've seen this scene before, but I kind of think I have. And there's the chopping of the wood and that sort of thing, where it's like, why do they keep mentioning this? Well, because where are we in this scene? How long have we been in this house or cabin?
That was also a function of wanting to be respectful of the disease. And I know people are hypersensitive about anybody writing anything what they don't have a direct connection to, which I personally think is ludicrous. I think if you study something and if you believe that an individual can learn, then therefore you can express your opinions and your views on that topic. That being said, one of the things that I did face, one of the biggest challenges when I asked the people that were involved in the mental health industry if it was possible for someone with that disease to raise a child. What I was told is that it is possible depending on the severity of the disease, but in order to cope with it, routine would have to be paramount and have to be so paramount that if anything disturbs that routine, it could potentially be really, really bad. So I built that into the writing for both the idea of like getting people lost as well as being true to my knowledge of the disease.
And I am sure that nothing in this film is going to disrupt that routine, and we're all going to live happily ever after.
Yeah.
I'm not spoiling anything.
Yeah.
So
it's like the love story.
There is one thing about this film that when you see it, you're going to go, oh, well, if you've seen the other film. It reminded me a bit of another recent film that I won't name because that's going to spoil some stuff. Mm-hmm. But it reminded me a bit of another recent film. The difference is you guys handled it really, really well and natural, and it made a lot of sense. And that movie that was in theaters really dropped the ball. Okay. So, they really did a poor job with it, and you guys did a great job with it. So bravo on outclassing the bigger budget films.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I won't say what that part is. Yeah. You mentioned motherhood and all of that, how it can be a triggering event theoretically. Mm-hmm. Amanda is I'm not sure if you guys have kids.
Yeah, actually,
but Amanda had just had a kid, right?
No, she had not had
or
a
she was
kid.
pregnant at the time?
We actually, it's so the film did take us a while to get done, and that's one of the most difficult things about indie filmmaking. Like sometimes you'll literally, because it does take a while, you'll, like you said, you'll see something in theaters and you go, oh, we wrote that 4 years before you guys did. It just took us longer to get done. Um, but we actually, three babies were birthed shortly after this film. The co-director Wesley Alley had another child just shortly after this film. His wife got pregnant. Amanda shortly after the film got pregnant, and shortly after the film, my wife and I got pregnant. So three babies came out. Like, I mean, they're all within a few months of each other. So
So no one had kids like prior to the filming or during the filming or anything like that?
other than Wesley, Wesley had already had two kids, but yeah, no, my wife and I, we were actually during this film, we were terrified because we had been trying to have kids for about a year at that point, and we had been told by the doctor that we basically couldn't have kids. So I think there was additional stresses and fears because obviously the longer you wait to have kids and the older you are, the likelihood for complications increases. So we're basically developing a movie about some of that whilst trying to get pregnant, and it was terrifying. But we're so happy. So we got a little baby, and Amanda does as well.
Yeah, I was wondering if they would film scenes about, birth causing the schizophrenia or being a triggering event for the schizophrenia, and losing the kid and not having custody and all that, and then going home and going, "Hey, kids!" so so they didn't have kids at the time.
No.
Did the movie, since it happened so quickly after you filmed, uh, were there any lingering kind of thoughts for them of, let's not make reality out of fiction? Or
I don't think so. I think we just honestly this film was so hard emotionally, and I mean, you saw the location. It was not easy. We had to take everything across that wire footbridge. But everything was done, and I felt like everybody sort of just took a big breath, and we were all basically like, all right, let's live life now for a little bit. So yeah, I think we all just sort of took a big breath, and um, I think all of us tried to just do something super uplifting and positive after going through something so taxing.
yeah, I mean, again, the horror of emotion is really what sticks with me about this film, and I think it's kind of cool that you guys were able to go, okay, we're done, back to
we
life.
we did, and that's
So, because I had a hard time getting back to life after watching it. So,
yeah, no, it's you got to do that. You got to take a breath. I like to do that with any films. I don't know. I don't like to get stuck in any genre, so I like to do something deep and dark and follow it up with something lighthearted. So
cool. Now, and you mentioned religion, uh, um, which is a big interest of mine. I love studying all different religions, and I found it kind of interesting that the movie kind of opens up with some references to religion, and then her character's like, oh, okay, you know what, maybe, and then perhaps it comes back later on, it's for a maybe or a yeah, or maybe she'll take on more of a religious thought process. You said that was included intentionally as backstory. There's also Amanda, I mean, her character is dealing with a breakup. It's kind of the sparking moment of the film where the most unrealistic thing in this entire film is the idea that someone cheated on Amanda. Let's make that clear
I know.
right now.
Where'd that come from? That's why we got her out of the way in the beginning
Yeah,
before people got to know her. So
yeah, exactly. Because I'm not believing this, guys. Not anyone who had their head on straight.
yeah.
So the there's even a point in the film where she's blaming herself for getting cheated on, where she's like, oh, really, it was my fault, which no, it wasn't. Obviously, it's never your fault. What went into that kind of backstory of she's dealing with depression and or some sort of anxiety, and maybe she has a personal conflict or doubts about religion, that sort of thing. It seems like a very well developed character.
Yeah. To be completely honest, a lot of the backstory. I usually, when I write a script, I'll usually write like 20, 30 pages of backstory that people never see. Um, Unfortunately, I don't always remember all of it when the years go by. I know that's probably not a great answer, but my brain sort of goes, okay, and we're moving. Um, so
Sure.
I can't quite pinpoint exactly uh, what that was. I know we needed a device because I wanted to play with the idea, obviously, of that being a triggering event is pregnancy. So we could either give her a boyfriend or just make her not have a boyfriend. But I wanted her to deal with that idea of the possibility of being pregnant. So we thought it was a stronger choice to have someone that she loved and cared about. But then we also didn't really want to have, to be completely honest, when we wrote this thing, we were trying to really, really do a female empowerment film. Uh, I don't want empowerment. I don't want to misuse the phrases either, but we wanted to do a very, very, very female-driven film. So we wanted to have as little male involvement as possible. Yet, there is a pregnancy, so obviously there's some, at least with modern science.
Sure.
So yeah, so I do know we needed to incorporate that character to some degree, or we felt as though we needed to, and we also didn't want them to be a large part of the story. We wanted it to really be isolated, two sisters in a cabin. Um, so yeah, it's sort of to the best of my knowledge, that's where I remember it, and it's a shame Amanda couldn't make it because I'm sure she would have this part way more down than I remember.
When it comes to religion, that's where Lynn Shay, who has, I'm not going to mislead people. She's not the main character, but when it comes to Scream Queens, she's like the queen mom of Scream Queens.
Yeah.
She's royalty. So having her involved in the film in any way, in a small but important role, I think that's noteworthy. People are going to want to check it out, the movie, just to see her put on a show. How did she get involved? I know that you knew her before. Someone involved had known her previously. So tell me about how she got involved, and you got the lucky strike of working with a legend.
Oh, very much. Well, I was lucky enough to I had gotten to work with her, I think, twice before this as an actor, and you know I, I got along really well with her, and I had a great deal of respect for her work. I actually got to play her son in a movie called Texas Heart. So we got to hang out all day one time, and then had a couple other scenes with her. And I can't remember what other movies. I think I've done 3 movies with her now. But so I did have a previous relationship, but I didn't want to just lean on that and be like, "Hey, Lynn, would you please maybe sorta." Um, Obviously, we did reach out to her, but I didn't make the contact. I believe we ended up having Wesley do the initial phone call and contact because I just didn't want to. I didn't want to play on that whole, "Hey, you know, I worked with you. You're a friend,"
Yeah,
or
do you owe me a favor? Yeah.
yeah, because that's totally not the case. Her, she's already given me so
Yeah.
many favors and just like advice with acting and life, and I didn't want to be the one to make that call. Though I would have if it came down to that, but apparently she liked the story enough and enjoyed talking with Wesley enough and was interested. Now I would have loved to, like you said, I'd love her to be in the film more. I would have loved to play in a little bit more of the psychosis of it and having Amanda's character sort of second guess what is reality and what is now, and what have you. Because one of the major things about the disease is that your dreams become more and more vivid. But unfortunately, and I can't remember if it was, budgetary or time or the amount of days we could potentially work with her. I can't remember exactly, but we were limited in the amount of time that we could work with her on this one. So we were very blessed to have her on board, and she brought a lot to the table, a lot of good ideas, a lot of in-depth thought behind it. But we definitely didn't have as much time as we would have liked.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing for horror fans.
Mm-hmm.
If Lynn Shay is in it, you're going to want to check it out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if you come for Lynn Shay and she has a small but important role, you're going to see two actresses that, I mean, I know there may not be a lot of crossover between horror fans and Bold and the Beautiful fans.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there is.
Maybe, I don't know.
But for those of you who may not know of the other two actresses, get ready, because they more than hold their own in really a film that not a lot of downtime as far as this film goes. There's a lot of emotions, a lot of layered emotions, like you mentioned earlier, of being confused, but maybe keeping a secret, and that sort of thing. It's there's a lot going on in the film, and everybody holds their own really, really well. So it is a fantastic film. I recommend it. I really, really loved it. So that leads me to think, surely you have other great plans that that you're working on that are going to blow us all away. I know your background is more comedy, right? But are there more horror?
No.
Are there,
It's actually not anymore.
Oh, okay. Just from your your email address, I was like,
well, I started off as a stand-up comedian. I started off with T.J. Miller and Hannibal Buress and Kumail and a few other guys. Little Rel, I started with him. I used to actually book him for shows on the road, and so I started in stand-up comedy. But no, I was one of those really sad clowns that put on a face, and then when I realized it, I found it was much more healthy to write drama and horror and tragedy than it is to do stand-up comedy, because I feel like stand-up comedy is like hiding emotions, whereas films, I feel like, do a much better job exploring and allowing you to truly release and feel those emotions. So
well, that's why I do what I'm doing now, because I'm not creative. I mean, as far as making movies and stuff like that, and watching horror films, watching science fiction films, they help purge a lot of those mental health demons that I think that, and that's why there's a lot of people that are in the horror community who, whether it's schizophrenia or not, or maybe just depression, anxiety, whatever, that maybe it's not surprising how many people in the horror community have these issues. And it's not that horror caused the issues, it's that they're seeking out a way to, in a healthy way, purge those kinds of feelings or those thoughts. So yeah, very good. So what is the family of Three Tales Productions doing next?
I don't know what's gonna come next with us. I know we worked on quite a few projects, and we got several that we'd really like to get off the ground. I consistently am writing, and we've got at least three stories right now that would be fantastic. So we've got one that we did as a short called Good Girl. We co-produced with Darren Bousman. Amanda starred in it, and Wesley Alley was director in it. And I've got an outline for that as a feature. It's basically Saw meets 50 Shades of Grey. But that one's a really, really fun project. And then like I said, the two in Winnemucca, Nevada, one of them was a psychological thriller. And it's about a police officer that's dealing with her own sort of internal struggles with wanting vengeance. So I'm very influenced by Korean revenge movies. And then we did a sort of a ghost story up there as well. So um, that one's about sort of there was a really really nasty tragedy up there in Winnemucca, um, uh, like a couple hundred years ago, but it's called Across the Tracks. It's had to do with the Native American tribe there and the locals long time ago, and then I sort of um, like you said, fictionalized it and brought it into modern day and dealt with some of that and made it into a ghost story. But um, any one of those, if we could do them, I'd be super happy. That'd be so much fun.
I would love a different take on a ghost story. I think I've mentioned this in another episode where I want different cultures' stories represented. So that would be awesome. But I got to tell you, 50 Shades of Grey meets Saw sounds pretty good. Who wouldn't want to see Christian Grey, I think is his name? Who wouldn't want to
Yeah,
see that guy tortured for a while?
yeah.
So
So
that's amazing. I would really love to see that. So, and you said that's based on a short called Good Girl.
yeah, that one's already out. So I don't know if you can get
The short is,
if you
yeah.
can get a screener from Amanda, but yeah, and a lot of this again, it really comes down to I just I love the people I work with so much. Obviously my wife Victoria, Amanda is one of my absolute best friends, and her husband, Andy Weisenberg. They're just all really really good people, and Amanda always plays the bubbly character when she's given it by, like I said, Hollywood stuff, but she has such an amazing range as an actress that I find myself writing for her as well as Victoria a lot, and so I'm constantly writing these roles that are a little bit darker, a little bit deeper, and Good Girl is definitely one of them. So um, that is one I would love to write, and the outline's already finished. We got it copywritten, and we did the short with Darren Bousman, director of Saw 2, 3, and 4. So it's certainly something that I think would be in that wheelhouse, but we'll see where we go from here, I guess.
Well, I am already looking forward to a potential Good Girl. And speaking of good, you're a good guy
Thanks. You
for
too.
hanging out with me and talking about the movie. Like I said, it's some amazing performances. It's a horror movie that you think you might know where it's going, but then it doesn't go there. It goes somewhere else. Just a really good movie. And I think it also is bringing attention to a mental illness that we don't hear about very often. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much, David. And for listeners, if you watch the movie and you enjoy it, please tell a friend, give us a nice comment on whatever site you saw it on. If you didn't like it, then don't read it. Don't write any bad comments because my mother reads them. So, yeah.
Do not break his mom's heart. Come on now. Uh, so thank you. Everyone, check out The Voices. I know you're going to love it. You will not break his mom's heart. Now, I want to explore what schizophrenia is. How does it affect a person and their family? So I reached out to Linda Stalters. She is a retired advanced practice registered nurse psychotherapist with broad-ranging experience as a clinical practitioner, educator, advocate, organizer, and speaker. And she is the founder of Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Since Hollywood often doesn't give a very realistic portrayal of what schizophrenia is, can you give us a sense of the variations in the illness? Is there a mild case and a severe case in general?
Absolutely. There is a continuum, and some people experience much more severe symptoms than others. Uh, uh, it is a brain illness, and a person's brain, even at conception, can be challenged by their genetics and potentially other environmental instances. I don't know if you want to go into that, but
Oh, sure. I mean, if there's certain things that can happen in life that can cause it,
It's predominantly genetic gene mutations or genetic predisposition. It can be because of various things, like a mother, when the baby is in utero, might have been exposed to a virus. And it could be from some trauma to the brain. It is caused by changes within the brain that can cause neurocircuitry problems within the brain, so that the connections and the communications within the brain are interrupted. It can cause changes within the structure of the brain. So it's a neurological brain disease. And it's nothing that it's nobody's fault. As a matter of fact, I talked to some people that used to think that it was because of the schizophrenic mother, and definitely it is not. However, if a person is very traumatized, trauma can cause changes within the brain as well. And so some young children can have symptoms, but of course, oftentimes we aren't privy to the symptoms that they might be experiencing. And I've talked to many people who said that even when they were 3, 4, 7, that they had symptoms that they now know was part of their schizophrenia. Like they would talk about the shadow that followed them, or one person wrote a poem when they were 7, talking about the voices in her head and outside of her head, and how challenging that was to differentiate between the two. And sometimes children might have some quirkiness that, nobody recognizes as something that's problematic, but in retrospect can say, oh, well, they were a little different. And sometimes there's no indication at all. And generally people don't display the behavior because of the symptoms. Now, it's not a behavioral disorder, okay? It is a brain disorder. And because of the changes within the brain causing some symptoms like auditory hallucination, perhaps voices, or hearing other kinds of sounds, or delusions of paranoid delusions, or thinking someone is after them, or poisoning your food, or whatever, that causes them to respond to that internal stimuli, which looks like people think that that's volitional behavior. Well, no, if you thought that someone was poisoning your food, you wouldn't eat it, would you? So people can have different, different severity, but when they perhaps hit adolescence or early adulthood, they may have what people call their first psychotic break. And what is very important is to recognize that early on, and when they are having symptoms earlier, which can be apathy, isolation, so that they have almost symptoms like depression. So sometimes people are diagnosed with depression, or children with ADHD, and they're treated as such. And ADHD medication isn't necessarily a good medication to give someone who has schizophrenia. So it's also very difficult sometimes to differentiate between bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia, because they're very, very closely related in symptomology. People with bipolar disorder can have a psychosis on either end of the continuum of depression and mania. So, but I can tell you that it is a myth that everyone who has schizophrenia is violent. They are much more likely to be very, very frightened of their surroundings. And if they do respond in a violent way, it's really response to their hallucinations, delusions.
Right. What they
And,
perceive as being a real threat, it may not be a threat,
right.
but gotcha.
Right. And so that's why it is so important to recognize the changes early on, which are very, very, very difficult to do, especially in adolescence when all adolescents, behave very strangely sometimes, and we can't differentiate between normalcy and, abnormalcy.
Boy, did you know me when I was an adolescent? Because
we all are that way, aren't we?
yeah. But it doesn't. I mean, just an aside. For instance, when I was a little kid, I very briefly was best friends with Dopey from Snow White. And that's normal. That's not
different.
Yeah. That's not necessarily a sign that someone is going to then hear voices and stuff like that in adolescence or as an adult. So obviously, that we're very much wanting to dispel the stigma of mental illness being something that causes people to be violent. So thank you for mentioning that. How common is a form of schizophrenia as far as, I mean, I don't know if you have an exact percentage of the population that suffers from it or.
So what, and this is a study that our organization is trying to do right now to clarify what those numbers might be, because right now it's almost it's difficult to differentiate. Like I say, it's schizophrenia spectrum, and about 1.1% of the population. So we have over 300 million people. So we have over 3.2 million people who have schizophrenia. That doesn't include the bipolar disorder with psychotic features,
Sure.
Which include, it brings it up to a much greater number. And then it affects, when we talk about we improve the lives affected by these illnesses, that includes the families and the community, especially the families, because you talk about stigma, it's not stigma, it's discrimination.
Sure. Thank you.
If you have a heart attack, you get treated. If you have a brain attack and you go into the hospital, go into the emergency room, they tell you to come back when you have done something to yourself or to someone else. Well, we don't ask someone to come back when they have an arrest,
Sure.
when their heart stops beating. But we do that for people. Our organization is trying to change that. We want to reclassify schizophrenia to start with schizophrenia spectrum as a neurological brain disorder, so that we quit treating people like they are different from someone who has a heart condition. And we stop criminalizing people who have a brain illness. We treat people differently if they have another brain illness called Alzheimer's. We don't let people who are confused and disoriented and also experience hallucinations and delusions. We don't let them run barefoot in the snow, homeless, and incarcerate them because of their illness. We actually put out a silver alert to try and find them. And if they end up in the hospital, we tell their families. With schizophrenia, it's totally the opposite. Nobody looks for them. If they are if they're taken to the hospital or incarcerated, the parents can't find out because of the HIPAA laws. And we're trying to change that so that there's a compassionate communication between caregivers and other clinicians and facilities where people might be housed. The greatest facility for people who have a severe neuropsychiatric brain illness are the jails and the prisons. They are not facilities for treatment.
No, thank you for saying that. Thank you. from the outside looking in, it seems like this would be an easy thing to spot of if you're hearing voices that aren't actually there, well, I need to go see a specialist. I need to get checked. But I can also kind of see where someone might think, if the illness is causing you paranoia, where you might think it's some government implant or someone's plotting against you, or a ghost or demon, or can you talk a bit about the struggle to identify the disorder and getting the person to accept, I need to go get help? I actually know a friend of a friend is dealing with this right now, where they are saying, well, maybe I don't need help. Maybe I don't know, have superpowers or something along those lines. Is there a struggle there, or do most people say, whoa, something weird is going on, I need to get this looked at?
Totally a struggle. Sometimes early on, when they start having some of those what we call prodromal symptoms, like they might hear something, or they might not feel so good. Some people actually know something's gone awry, and they will seek help. But once they have that psychotic break. It's also neurological, and they have what's called anosognosia. They don't know they're ill. They don't perceive it. They don't have the ability to be aware that they are ill, and everything that they're experiencing is real to them. And so, if you didn't think that you had diabetes, would you take insulin? No, you wouldn't. And so, if you don't think that you have a brain illness, you wouldn't take medication or seek care. So it is a huge struggle for people to help someone to get help. And so some of the things that we can do is there's a really good book that explains anosognosia very well and how to talk to people. And it's called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help by Dr. Javier Amador. And he uses what he developed as called the LEAP program to how you talk to people. First, you listen, you empathize, you agree with what you can agree with, and then you partner with them on their journey. And it's not about telling them that they're ill, but helping them to accept some help in being able to cope with what they're experiencing. And it is a challenge. And sometimes if you can get them into their primary care physician and say, okay, really, it's time for your annual checkup. And there's just so much involved. And again, the HIPAA laws and the aging out of your parents, being under your parents' care, makes it even more challenging. And so there's just so much I can talk about, but we're really working to change that law with HIPAA so that people can talk to the clinicians, the caregivers can be heard, because any of these horrific things that happen, and the people who might perpetrate these horrific violent crimes, their parents were begging for help. But because of the misguided patients, advocates who say you have the right to refuse treatment. Well, if you don't know you're ill, and you're very ill, and the parents know what they're talking about, what their thoughts are, and they're talking about their delusions and hallucinations, and if the clinicians would listen to them and give them the opportunity to be treated, give them the opportunity to live a really meaningful life, because the longer someone is in psychosis, the more progressive the damage might be to the brain.
I can even see where, not to interrupt, but I can see where someone would say, well, this nurse, this doctor is in on it. And it's, I mean, the mind, I deal with generalized anxiety disorder, which is obviously very different, But at the same time, I thought that was normal life, and until it got explained that it wasn't, and I went, oh, I can actually get treatment for this. But if it was so severe that you thought that, things like conspiracies and that sort of thing were plotted against you by random people you saw on the street, then I can see where you would resist getting the help. That's
absolutely.
that's terrible.
Very difficult. And another thing is, if they've been having symptoms for a long time, just mild, hearing some voices or some sounds or different, mild symptoms, they may just think that that's normal. They may think that everyone hears voices,
Yep.
And of course they are can be very suspicious. And to be able to develop a trusting relationship with someone, having a good clinician or someone who can help them. But early intervention is critical. And getting authorization to release information to your family is critical. When someone is stable enough to sign those papers, that's very important. And then when they're stable enough to understand that they are ill, that the medication helps them, then what they can do an advanced directive, a psychiatric advanced directive, like, people have advanced directives for other illnesses. You can have an advanced directive for psychiatry, so that you can say, when I'm so ill that I don't know that I'm ill, you can ensure that I take my medication. This is the medication that works for me. This medication I have had bad side effects from. This clinician has always been very helpful. This facility has not been a place where I want to go. And those kind of things are important for them to be able to spell out, so that when they are ill, when they start becoming ill and have an exacerbation, then they can hopefully receive the treatment that they need. And that's not always easy to do either. And we also want to, right now, the poor police, I feel so sorry for them, because they are usually the front line people to respond to a crisis, and that many receive crisis intervention training, but that's not their calling. But it's important that they do receive that training, so that they can know how to de-escalate. They know how a person is thinking, and what they see may not be what you think they see. They may see you as someone different. They may see you their vision can be very different than what you think. They may think you are the military after them, or the CIA, or the whatever. So there are just so many things to have to consider. As a matter of fact, I went to talk to Secretary Ben Carson, and I said, I know that you want to help, and I know that the president wants to help folks who are homeless and incarcerated, and to stop this. But I said, you can't just give them a hamburger and housing. That's not going to work. They have the opportunity to be the people that are homeless, to be in shelter, but they're not going to go in there because they're not treated. They know that there'll be people in there that aren't treated. And when we talk about violence, the violence is because people are not treated, untreated, and don't have the opportunity to be treated. And when something horrific goes wrong, they are as much a victim as anyone else.
Sure.
Because they were not taken care of. And their life and their families' lives are so destroyed.
So let's imagine, since we talk about science fiction on this show, let's imagine a perfect world where the funding and the programs are there, and someone can go in, get the medication, get the counseling they need, all of that stuff. Once someone does commit to getting that help, can they live normal life? I mean, like as far as the outlook of if someone has, I guess, a severe form of schizophrenia, can they resume life and not have that issue, or is it something they have to fight for the rest of their life? Can it, can they get over it? I mean,
So, okay, so this is generally, some people can have a 1 or 2 time psychosis, and that's it. But most generally, this is a chronic illness, like other chronic illnesses, like arthritis or something else, and diabetes, and you wouldn't stop taking your insulin. And sometimes medication, it's a very difficult task. It's challenging to find the right medication for someone. To find and it's not just medication that someone needs. They need help in coaching with school or work, whatever that they want to do, social skills, maintaining, their activities of daily living, and helping them move into what is their particular personal a spot where they are as stable as they're going to get. Some people, I know people who have been CEOs of corporations. I know people who are attorneys, CPAs, MDs, PhDs, people who are comedians, people. But on the other hand, there are people who are not able to reach the same pinnacle that they would have before they were diagnosed. But you can't give up. And there are many medications. There are some that are better than others. They have some that are in the pipeline. The least researched and developed medications are antipsychotics, because they are so expensive to create, and there's such a failure rate, and the least amount of money to research, such as to the National Institute of Mental Health. They get less funding than other departments within NIH. So we need that fundamental to find out, okay, what neurological pieces need to be addressed? What can we do to prevent? And once a medication is discovered that really helps a person, doesn't mean that it'll continue to help them, that they might have to change medications again. They may have to increase, decrease. It's a balancing act. There are side effects that have to be adjusted and taken care of. And if a person thinks, which is frequent, they think, oh, well, I'm doing really pretty well right now. I don't need this medication.
That's a bad
They
idea.
go off their, but they don't know that. And they will, they may go off their meds only a couple of days, and they have slid out from under that stability. And then it's very difficult to get them back. And if they stop one medication that was really successful and effective, they may not respond to that same medication when they try to reestablish that stability again. It's a very, very complex, very, very challenging illness. And I know people who have been incarcerated, who have been homeless, who are doing spectacularly well. We have people who work for us who are amazing people, very, very amazing people. They just really have to figure out what are some of the stressors, and oftentimes they really are overachievers because they want to prove that they're capable, but that puts them in a challenging position because that stress can trigger their symptoms. So you have to, and it's very important when someone is working in whatever situation, whether it's a housekeeping or in a corporate office, to observe the ADA. So what is going to help people who might respond to the external stimuli around them. We have to give them some accommodations. Often people who are taking medications, it's difficult to get up in the morning because they are really sedatives. So allow them to start later in the day. If they are out and about, give them a cubicle that they have some privacy and they don't hear all the other external stimuli that's going on. And just do the accommodations. And if you were going for chemotherapy, your employer would give you that opportunity to go as frequently as you needed to the doctor for your chemo, right?
Sure.
Well, they won't do that if you're going for your psychiatric doctor's appointment. So, we have a lot to do to change the discrimination that people do experience with these illnesses. And so this is Minority Mental Health Month. And so to recognize that people of color, they are doubled up on discrimination.
Yeah.
Because they are compounded. It's compounded because they have these illnesses and then they are misperceived. And sometimes they're over-diagnosed or under-diagnosed and undertreated. So what we need is comprehensive care. We have to stop, shutting off the care from the neck up from the rest of the body, because a person is a whole person and your brain really regulates the whole body. And a person with schizophrenia has more than just schizophrenia. They have other illnesses that kind of go with that and other risk areas. So a person really needs total medical care. I would prefer to just eliminate mental health care. It's all medical care. Eliminate the exclusions of care in the hospital and have ongoing chronic health care.
Well, you are preaching my religion right now. Thank you for dedicating your life to this. Tell me a little bit about the Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America. What do you guys do? And importantly, where do people go to find out information and donate to the cause?
Oh, thank you. So we provide support groups for people who are diagnosed and their family members. Right now, almost all of our groups, some of them are opening up, it depends on the area, but all of them are virtual. But even when we don't have this virtual situation globally, we were pioneers on providing virtual groups because oftentimes family members can't get to a face-to-face group because they are caring for a very ill child. And people who are diagnosed for one reason or another have a challenging time getting to a face-to-face group, although we would prefer that they go to a face-to-face group, that people who are diagnosed, that they can increase their social skills and connectivity with other people. But I think we have 7 conference call groups a week for people who are diagnosed, and we have a few for people who are caregivers, and we call that Families for Care. And the one for people who are diagnosed, it's Schizophrenia Alliance, Psychosis Support and Acceptance. So it's not just for schizophrenia, it's for anyone who experiences psychosis. And we actually have support groups, face-to-face and virtual groups around the world. And we have some of our materials in Hungarian, Russian, Spanish, German, and we have Farsi, and we have groups in India and Japan and Africa and some other places. And so we also do a lot of advocacy work to, like I say, reclassify schizophrenia spectrum as a neurological brain disease. We believe that will change the treatment paradigm, both for medical treatment and social treatment of people who experience psychosis. And so we are working to make that happen with the APA to change the description in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that clinicians use to diagnose. But it isn't just the clinicians that use that. The criminal justice system uses that, and sometimes our people will call us and say that my son's in jail right now. The doctor wants him in the hospital, but the attorney says that, well, the DSM says it's a psychological disorder. It's not a brain disease, so they need to stay in jail because it's a behavioral disorder. So we have to change that. And it'll increase the availability of funds for research. And we're working on a project to quantify the cost of not caring so that we can present to the legislators, okay,
there you go.
This is how much it costs us if a person doesn't get the appropriate treatment. And we're making that very comprehensive. There are a lot of different studies out there where we're going to do a data and meta-analysis plus do some other analyses to bring some of that together and present it to the legislators. And one of our board members happens to be former Congressman Tim Murphy. So he knows what they need. And we have a group of researchers working on that. We have a white paper for reclassification and comparing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's to schizophrenia, what the symptoms are, what the genetics is, and what incarceration is, and treatment, and homelessness, and how we treat people. And let's see, there must be more that we're building our chapters around the country. And so we're just in the beginning of doing that so that we have more grassroots efforts in every state. Right now we have a chapter in Florida, Maryland, Delaware. There's one developing in Colorado and some other places that I can't remember, but we're working on that so that we have a broader base. So I think that's about it. And please go to www.s as in schizophrenia, SARDAA.org, Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America.org. And you can call our office at 240-423-9432.
You guys are doing amazing work. I think this is incredibly important to stop criminalizing the idea of mental illness and start actually helping people before the chaos erupts. And I think that once, if you guys can deliver that and say, look at the cost on our society of not doing this, I think that we're going to see that the whole society will be much, much better off if we invest in helping people before bad things happen, whether it's suicide or crimes or that sort of thing, right, instead of locking people up. So amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome, and please change the language from mental health to brain health.
I will do that. I will work on that and get that into my head as well. So
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And just like I told you, it's brain health. You learn something new every day. So brain health is the terminology we want to use. I really like that. So I want to thank my guests, Linda Stalters, MSN of Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America. Check them out, donate to them. They're doing great work. And thanks as well to Bradley Fowler, the writer and co-director of The Voices. Make sure you watch that. And most of all, thank all of you for listening to the show and supporting us. The show has been growing quite a bit over the last couple of episodes, and it's all because of you. We have a lot more growth to do, some really cool stuff coming up in the very near future. So make sure you follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Feel free to send us an email at This podcast will save the world at gmail.com. And remember, like any great franchise, your story isn't over yet.